I saw her in the mortuary. I went to see her. She looked asleep. You could tell she wasn't there, but she kind of just looked asleep.
Take a close look at these boys. The boy on the right, Aaron Isaacs, was just 16 years old. Yet on a brisk March evening in 2019, they took the life of an innocent girl in the most brutal way. And the reason for this is as sad and outrageous as you can imagine. Jody Chesney's life came to a bitter end just as she was getting ready to pass her A-levels and pursue a career in photography. She bled out in her boyfriend's arms, wondering what she'd ever done to deserve this. But it would take a long time until her loved ones understood. And even today, the whole story makes little sense. Let's explore the tragic case of Jody Chesney. Jody Chesney's life began on June 18, 2001, in Barking, United Kingdom.
She was painfully shy as a young girl. And I mean, it used to, grate on me, because I'm not shy. But she had this thing where it was just shyness. She wouldn't say boo to her. Because behind closed doors, you couldn't shut her up. But when she went into primary school, there was a teacher there, I can't remember her name, but she really brought her out of her shell.
Once she felt included in school activities and encouraged for every little thing she did well, Jody became a happy, confident girl who made friends everywhere she went. When she was 6, Jody's parents split up. She grew up with her dad and her sister in East London.
I was a single father then, with 2 kids, so I had to give up work, and it was about a year of sort of readjustment. And then so I got back to work, and my mum would pick them up, and I'd get home about 6.
But Peter wasn't alone in raising his daughters. He had his mother's help, and he also had his brother David, who was a local church reverend.
It's a big family and continues to grow. We are a close family. We're not in each other's pocket, but we do see each other very regularly, particularly for celebrations, and we're in each other's houses quite often.
Jody had a big supportive family around her growing up, and this was showing in her teenage years. At 16, she enrolled in a 6th form college where she studied psychology, sociology, and photography. She was really passionate about it. She would often take trips around London, creating photography projects for her classes, and she would tell her friends all about her work.
I knew that she wanted to do something with photography. She was really into it. She also did want to do something with animals, but she didn't know what. I'm pretty sure that she wanted to do something like animal photography or something like wildlife photography.
For the time being though, Jody spent her free time wandering around town, seeking inspiration from urban landscapes.
And she did all that on her own, and I mean, that's scary when you think about it, going to London on your own, but that was the sort of girl she was. She was dedicated at school. She wanted to do well.
But like most teenagers, Jody would spend most of her time with her friends, a group of quirky artists she'd become really close with during high school.
She was honestly the kindest soul I've ever met. I don't think she had a bad word to say about anyone, and that was really different from a lot of the other people I'd met, to meet someone so caring, no matter what.
Sadly, Jody's trust in people and overall confidence would turn to dust in the blink of an eye. Jody grew up in Harold Hill, a tough neighborhood that was known for illegal substance gangs and high crime rates. In 2019, when Jody was about to turn 18, narcotics gangs were getting even more aggressive. In fact, there was a big influx of new recruits in Harold Hill. Such was the case of Svensson Ong-Akwi. He led a narcotics gang in the area Jody lived in, and Aaron Isaacs worked directly under him as a seller. Svensson was 19 and Aaron was just 16, but they were already known as a violent, destructive people.
Somehow they feel that by being part of the drugs business, that they are going to make money, they're going to have status, that they're going to have greater success much more quickly than they would have if, like Jody, they stayed at school, they studied hard, they would go off to university.
Of course, it's an illusion. There's no such thing as a quick, worry-free cash. The sellers don't make that much money at all, and everyone in a gang is constantly looking over their shoulder for cops or rival gangs. It's a violent life full of fear and running. Jody, on the other hand, had nothing but kindness to spread around.
She's the kindest person in the world. I mean, there's no one more true and kind than Jody. So there's not an ounce of malice in her, not one bit of malice at all. She liked to help people. She liked to be good, kind. She was funny.
On March 1st, 2019, it was Jody's dad's birthday.
So I'm having a coffee in the kitchen, same as every day. Jody pokes her head round the banister and says, "Happy birthday, Dad." So I say, "Thank you, darling," and I shoot off to work. And it was the last time I spoke to her.
March 1st would also be the day Jody would die. That evening, Jody had planned a night out with her friends, while Peter would be out drinking with his own friends for his birthday. He also wanted to celebrate a new job with a big pay raise, so he invited friends, co-workers, and his brother to a big pub.
I just started a new job in November. So I was sort of 3 months in, and it was a sales position, and I was really going for it. You know, it was doing really, really well, really succeeding with the job. I was over the moon with that.
Jody's plans weren't as extravagant. After stopping by her home to change, Jody met her boyfriend Eddie and her friends, and they all walked to a local park called Amy's Park.
The park, it was basically just fields. Like, it looked like a lot of greenery, and there was one sort of small kids' play area. I wouldn't exactly say small, but obviously I think because we were bigger, it looked small.
The pals hung out on the kids' climbing frame and on the green benches, just like they always did. They would sit, chat, and have a laugh till the late hours of the evening.
I wasn't worried about Jody. You never really had to, you know. She was so sensible. She was always with her friends. You know, I mean, I know it was dark and they were out quite late. They were out sort of 9, half 9. But that wasn't out of the ordinary. You know, they should be able to sit in a park. It wasn't that late.
But that night, it was particularly dark. When Clarice joined the group, she had to use her phone's flashlight and guide herself by the music coming from the park to find them.
We were sitting there, we was all having fun and stuff, and basically there was 2 people sitting on the bench opposite us. And I was like, you know what, just sitting there, you know, but they did look a bit sort of dodgy, you know. They were like looking back at us, they weren't even speaking to each other, they were both on their phones.
These were Svensson and Aaron. They had nothing to say to each other. They weren't friends, they were on a mission. Every few minutes, the two would look in the group's direction. The pals would look back at them, and they would turn their heads away. But it was clear something was off about them. They weren't the friendly type. But one moment, they suddenly got up without saying anything to each other, and they left.
And they got up and walked away. This was actually like one of our last conversations. She nudged me, she literally just nudged me and goes, "Hey Faye, do you see a face in a tree?" And I was like, "What?" And I looked up at the tree, I was like, "I see what you mean."
That moment, everyone could hear a scuffle, like there was movement behind them. The next second, Jody screamed at the top of her lungs, and everyone's blood froze. They didn't understand what had happened. Jody stood up suddenly, and she was crying hysterically.
Jody started screaming, I stood up, I looked around, gone, oh my God, has she been stabbed?
Indeed, it was dark, and it took a while until Jody's friends understood the full reality of what was happening. Their friend had been stabbed, and her blood was oozing out fast.
And you could hear her screams. I've never heard them screams before in my life. They're like worse than horror movie screams. Like, you don't ever expect it to be that much, but it was scary.
In a heartbreaking move, Jody collapsed into Eddie's arms. Her boyfriend watched as her cries were getting quieter and quieter. By now, everyone was screaming or crying. Everyone was in panic mode, not knowing what to do next. Within a few minutes, someone called the emergency services, hoping they weren't too late. But it seemed like they were.
By that time, Jody had went quiet. She'd went quiet, and that's what had worried everyone a lot more, I think. Because when we could hear the screams, she was screaming, you could tell she was in pain, but we could still hear her.
It was a really terrifying moment when you realize your friend no longer has the power to scream or talk. Jody was lying in Eddie's arms, helpless and slowly losing consciousness. Within 15 minutes, the ambulance arrived together with a team of police officers.
So the officers arrived and they found Jody and they found Jody's friends all very distressed and very upset. Ambulance arrived to provide obviously first aid and try and help and treat Jody.
But the paramedics couldn't do anything on the spot. Jody needed a hospital, and she needed it right then and there. Unfortunately, the closest hospital that could treat her on the spot was the Royal London Hospital, and it was a 30-minute drive away. Jody was on her way to the hospital when the officer made a difficult call.
I got a call about 10 o'clock, I think, to say that Jody had been attacked and we're coming to get you. I was like, whoa, wait, what?
Peter and David were desperate to obtain more information, but the police wouldn't say anything more. They just said a van would be at the pub soon to get them to the hospital.
Nothing was there. So look, you stay there. City police are going to come and pick you up. And so Pete and I just waited. It wasn't long, and we got in the van.
But they didn't make it to the hospital. Jody died on her way.
So we were in the back of the van. Sorry. And I hear on the radio that please reroute Jody's dad to home.
Jody died after losing a lot of blood. Her dad heard live as the paramedics lost her. He dropped to his knees and cried while his brother held him. Imagine celebrating your birthday and then hearing your daughter has been killed in front of her friends.
Probably one of the hardest things that we did, just sitting there, knowing that we'd lost Jody. And even though we were together, probably being as lonely as we could, even though we were all together, it was a lonely place.
The whole incident made no sense to anyone. Jody didn't have any enemies. In fact, she was always surrounded by friends and loved ones. She never consumed any narcotics or was involved in any sketchy crews. So her family as well as the police were at a loss. Who could have done this and what was their motive? Was Jody just at the wrong place at the wrong time?
She was a kid in the park. So not really the wrong place at the wrong time, really, is it? I don't really understand that phrase, but they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. They shouldn't have been there. She was perfectly within the rights to be there.
The random and senseless murder also meant that the police had a hard time finding the killers. Usually, the first thing the officers do is trace the victims' activities. Were they involved in a gang? Did someone have reason to murder them? Did they have an angry, jealous partner? Or any sort of drama in their lives? In Jody's case, she had none of that. No drama, no drugs, no enemies.
And that just kept flashing through my mind is, oh my God, how are we going to solve this? There's a number of things we would look at in terms of obtaining evidence, but it was just at that initial point, it was just going to be very, very difficult to find out who was responsible.
Jody's death was a traumatic event for her family and a moment of crisis for the police. Without leads, it seemed like the case would become cold and the killers would continue to roam free. But soon the detectives would learn something that would crack open Jody's case.
Late Saturday afternoon, early evening, we were made aware that a member of the public had contacted Romford Police Station to report he'd seen a small black car, parked with its headlights off. And he then saw what he believed two figures run from the park and the playground and jump in the car, and then the car sped off.
The witness was a car enthusiast, and he had ventured to guess the car's model and year. The investigators had to believe him. It was the only lead they had. So they proceeded to identify every dark-colored Vauxhall Corsa made in 2008 in East London. Interestingly enough, there was a black Corsa abandoned just a few miles away from Amy's Park. It had also been involved in a recent accident.
So I arranged officers to go there as quickly as possible. And fortunately for us, the vehicle was still in situ. No one was with it. So we treated that as a crime scene. The vehicle was subsequently recovered to a forensic car pound and then subject to a forensic examination.
The officers traced the car back to a member of a local narcotics gang. He abandoned the car after a botched deal, fearing an arrest. Ironically, he would be arrested, but not for that deal.
Telephone records indicated that he was on his phone at or near the time of the murder, and that he was involved. He was then in contact with other people who we then subsequently suspected of being involved in the murder.
When the driver of the Corsa was arrested, he said he had nothing to do with the killers. He also refused to give the name of the killers, but the officers simply traced his phone calls on the night of Jody's murder. The picture became quite clear. 19-year-old Svensson Ung-Akwi had spoken to the driver several times. From their conversations, the officers understood that he was involved in much more than selling narcotics. The police tracked Svensson's home address to a hostel in Romford, so they knocked on his door with a warrant for his arrest. But he wasn't there.
One of the things in terms of working with young people who get caught up in the drugs trade is that they start out imagining that they're going to be like Scarface. They start out thinking that they're going to be major drug dealers, driving fast cars, earning huge amounts of money. If you think about Svensson Ung-Akwi, he was hardly living the high life. He had no permanent address. He was living in hostel accommodation. He basically had very little.
While some officers looked for Svensson, others looked at the CCTV footage around Amy's park. They identified Svensson, who was wearing a fur-lined hoodie. Then they found him in different footage meeting the Corsa's driver in a cafe on the day of the murder. Using this footage, the police eventually tracked Svensson to an address. He was staying with the family of Aaron Isaacs, his 16-year-old runner.
He's on that roof left.
The two boys were expecting the police anytime. They knew what they'd done was a different level of nasty, and they were prepared to run as soon as they saw a police car. The police arrived at Aaron's address in the dead of night, but they weren't sleeping. When the boys saw the car, they tried to run. Svensson went out the back door, and Aaron tried to jump the back fence. Svensson then climbed onto the conservatory, but he fell through its roof.
Oh, he's through the conservatory.
Through the conservatory next door. Come round there. Just open it up.
Svensson was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He acted like he was completely surprised to hear this charge.
Detained! Yeah. Suspicion of murder.
The police weren't planning on arresting Aaron. They didn't know he was involved in the murder too.
And when Aaron Isaacs was detained, he claimed not to know anything about why the police were there or what Svensson may have been involved in.
But why had he run off like that? And how come he was offering shelter for Svensson, knowing he was on the run? So the officers arrested Aaron for harboring a fugitive. This way they could interrogate both boys and see if there was any inconsistencies in their story. As you probably know, this is how the police catch many teenage criminals. They start ratting out each other. However, after interrogating Aaron for a few hours, the police came to a bitter conclusion. They had no evidence to hold him at the station any further. They had to release him. Aaron played his part well. It really looked like he didn't know anything. With Svensson, it was a different story. His DNA was all over the Vauxhall Corsa, so he was charged with murder and put in custody indefinitely. But soon enough, the police uncovered a crucial bit of CCTV footage. It showed Svensson and Aaron getting into the Corsa just an hour or two before Jody's murder.
And we saw Aaron Isaacs and Svensson Ung-Akwi getting out of a taxi outside the hostel, and then they both walked off down the road where we will be able to show that they were then collected by the Vauxhall Corsa. The evidence was overwhelming.
So in May 2019, Aaron was arrested once again and charged with murder.
Charging a 16-year-old with murder is heartbreaking because they are children, they are kids.
Sadly, there are more and more kids being recruited into a life of crime and narcotics. Of course, they're the most vulnerable, and they're easy targets for older criminals.
You're seeing this all the time, is that young people as young as 8 and 9 are being targeted to come into gangs, and that's where they get them, really young. New trainers, a bit of money, that's what happens, and sadly that continues.
The picture is even more tragic. The young children who get recruited by gangs are usually poor and live in unstable, violent families. They'd do anything to get out of there, only to discover an even worse environment.
These kids that have not got a stable family home, or have not got a father or a mother that's there to steer them in the right direction are easily led, you know? They're easily manipulated by gangs.
When the police took a quick look at Svensson and Aaron's records, they found records in the first place. At their young age, both already had pretty serious criminal records.
What I found interesting when I was looking at Aaron Isaacs was that he had a criminal record that went back to when he was 14. So we've got clearly, it seemed to me, a young man who isn't invested in school, doesn't see his future as coming from staying on at school, learning a trade. This is somebody who's going to be caught very quickly by older men who want to use him for their own ends within the sale and distribution of drugs.
Just 6 months before Jody's death, the two boys had been involved in a stabbing with another young boy. But he survived and didn't press charges, so the case was dropped. Now, the situation was very different. The police had Svensson and Aaron identified next to a horrific crime scene, but they denied their involvement vehemently. So the investigators had to go another way. First, they looked at their relationship. It was clear Aaron worked for, not with, Svensson. He was like a younger brother who wanted the status that Svensson seemed to have. Except it's all very sad. Svensson barely had any status. He was just a small narcotics gang leader, struggling to make ends meet. Svensson and Aaron's trial began in late 2019 at the Old Bailey in central London. For the first time, Jody's family, friends, and boyfriend saw Svensson and Aaron face to face.
I went for the first 3 days, and I didn't go again until the verdict, because it was so difficult to see them trying to wriggle out of this and lie when we knew from the evidence that the police got that they were there. I saw Svensson blame Isaacs. I saw Isaacs blame Svensson because we knew they were both in the park.
Yep, they were just as immature as they looked. Each tried to pin the blame on the other, saying it was their idea to kill Jody, and they were just pulled along. So they didn't deny it. They just wanted to throw each other under the bus. As always, criminals' disgusting behavior leads them to dig their own graves. Here's where the story takes another tragic twist. Killing Jody was a case of mistaken identity. Aaron and Svensson were trying to take out a member of a rival gang. That night in the park, it was dark, and the two boys mistook the group of friends as their rival gang. That's when they rushed to Jody's back and plunged a huge into her back before running off to the Vauxhall Corsa.
I think everything points to it being a case of mistaken identity.
So, Jody died for nothing. It was an unprovoked attack, and she fell collateral damage to a silly narcotics war. Svensson and Aaron saw themselves as cartel leaders when they were just two mindless, violent boys, unable to distinguish a gang from a group of teenage friends. After 5 hours of deliberation, Svensson and Aaron were found guilty of first-degree murder. Jody's family and even the police officers were crying with relief. Neither Svensson or Aaron showed one bit of remorse. Throughout their trial, they stood there poker-faced, staring into the eyes of the people they'd destroyed. When they talked, they lied about their innocence and tried to make the other one look guilty. Svensson was sentenced to 26 years to life in prison, and Aaron to 18 years to life. It was Svensson who pushed the knife into Jody, and Aaron who was a willing supporter. The boys might be in jail forever, but what they did scarred dozens of people for life. It's sad and infuriating to know that Svensson and Aaron didn't think for 1 minute about the consequences of their actions. And even after their arrest and trial, they didn't seem to care.
They've now had their lives ripped apart by the actions of these people, and their lives are never going to be the same. The lives of, Jody's family are never ever going to be the same.
It's true. For Jody's dad, her death was the end of his life. Jody's boyfriend Eddie also said that his life has been changed forever. It's truly sad to think just how many lives were affected by the two vile monsters who wanted to spread the violence, the only language they knew. We can only share Peter's words about them.
They're not worthy of my thoughts. I don't hate them, because in order to hate someone, you have to care. I don't care about them. I don't hate them. I don't care enough. They're scum. They're scumbags. through and through, and I hope they have a terrible time in jail.
In 2020, Jody's dad created the Jody Chesney Foundation, which teaches children about the danger of carrying and using knives. Jody's memory as a positive force and a kind soul might just help prevent random senseless murders like hers. Thanks for watching, you guys. What do you think about this case? Let me know down in the comment section. Before you go, don't forget to click that thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel for more blood-chilling content. Till next time, and stay safe.